What are some of the wounds that people forget to heal that ends up causing them years of pain?
Yeah, the immediate answer is all of them. All of them that have been afflicted upon an individual, right? It's the stuff that we run from that really hurts. But some of those common ones are divorce. So when parents separate, especially when children are at a young age, most children, because we're so referential at that age during those formative years, meaning that the everything's our fault, we're responsible for everything. We make it mean in our nervous systems and in our minds that we did that thing that's causing us pain, and equally we did that thing that's causing us joy. And parents divorcing is a very common thing in our world, right? And often those divorces, they're not really amicable. They're not kind. They're not nice. There's volatility. There's movement. There's uncertainty, even at the bare minimum. But then there's often abuse. There's often disharmony and the parents not liking each other. And children take that on and it affects their self-worth. It affects their value, their self-perception, and they carry that on into adult life. So divorce is a big one. Actual abuse, sexual, physical, emotional abuse is a big one. Bullying is a big one. And as a result of that, so many children have body image issues, they have weight issues, they have issues with food, they have issues with, again, how they see themselves in the world in relationship to others. So a lot of people compare so much, so they become hyper competitive. They never feel good enough as adults, or the opposite can happen where they sometimes feel too much. So perfectionism as well is another big issue, mainly for, I wouldn't say just women, but a lot of that is felt in women. It's felt in women and men differently, right? But perfectionism, the need to perform, like to be the top of your game consistently and always. And if you're not good enough. So it's that need for validation. It's that need for external approval. And we carry these wounds on into our adult lives.
And I think that people struggle with self-awareness. I think a lot of people in the personal development space, they've worked on self-awareness and they have tools to be aware of some of these patterns that they may be experiencing. But for somebody who maybe isn't aware yet of some of these problems, what are some of the main warning signs that some of this stuff is creeping up in their adult life?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to what you shared. Let me just speak to awareness for a moment, and then we can go into some of these warning signs. So some people have intellectual awareness. Not all. You're right on that. Awareness eludes us, right? Like we don't know what we don't know. We have to make the unconscious conscious. But we don't know how to go through that process, right? And we'll get to those warning signs in a second, which helps us become more aware. But what happens with awareness is the people that do become aware of, say, their pain points or patterns in their lives, behaviors, belief systems, values, etc., that aren't serving them, they just stay at awareness. They think, oh, I have awareness of it, therefore I'm quote unquote healed, or therefore I've done enough work. But there's so much more that happens after awareness that very few people actually go to. And that's moving the energetics of this and moving the trapped emotions and moving the intensity and the sense of disempowerment and low self-worth through the actual body and nervous system. We can get to that later. But in terms of warning signs, it's actually really quite simple, but we just don't pay attention to it because we're so restless and so consumed with the next thing and trying to run away from our pain. So when you're experiencing the same thing over and over again in your life, for example, you keep dating emotionally unavailable people, or you keep attracting people that only want high explosive sex, or you're attracting people that are long distance only, right? But you have a vision in your mind of what you want life to be, and the things that are happening in your life aren't matching that. That's the warning sign. That's the warning sign that's telling you you're being run by unconscious factors that are still impacting you from probably a very long time ago, that you haven't resolved, that you haven't healed, that you haven't forgiven, and that you haven't actually felt so that you can move on and beyond them.
I think one of the big mistakes I see people make is that they blame their childhood for everything. Like they're 53 and they're still talking about what happened to them in sixth grade. Not to say that what happened wasn't bad. I just think it keeps people trapped. And my point with this is that at what point do people need to recognize or can they recognize that some of these patterns they're developing have been caused by them in their adulthood and not just in their childhood?
Yeah. So, very astute observation. Everything in life moves through stages, and there are stages and levels of awareness, right? We actually have to go through a stage of feeling victimized and feeling sorry for ourselves, not because it's productive in and of itself, but because it's part of the healing or wholeness journey. The problem is what you just highlighted. Most of us, we stay stuck in the victimization. It's more convenient, and for years, by the way, for years, it's more convenient to blame something or someone than actually apply the effort to do the inner work, to move, to break free of the bondage of the past and finally get to a place where we can actually forgive because we've felt. So when we unpack that more, we don't want to feel, we don't want to grieve. We don't want to grieve what was lost. We don't want to grieve what was happened. So we'd rather keep intellectualizing and spinning it around in our heads. Again, it's more convenient to blame someone else. It's more confronting to look at ourselves. What happened to you as a child is not your fault. And as an adult, you have to choose to move from a disempowered state when you were younger and that you're still carrying forward as an adult into an empowered state. But there's massive effort that's required with that and massive confrontation of pain. But through that and at the other end of that is also immense freedom.
And as you're saying that, one of the other problems I think people have is, they have some of these unfortunate situations happen to them as a child, and then because of that, they make bad decisions in relationships in their adult life, or they turn to drugs. Like, how can people separate? Like, what's the thing they actually have to heal? Like, is it the parts of them from their childhood they still haven't fully accepted, or is it like the mistakes they made, like in their 20s and they're in their 30s, that have caused their life to not to be in a place where they don't want to be?
Yeah, it's all of it. And people hurt people is a very true statement. And people hurt people and they blame their past or they blame something that happened to them as an excuse to continue to do that. Why is that? Because again, the root of this or part of the root of this is disempowerment. When we experience great intensity, our power was taken from us, we gave it away, or we lost it, AKA disempowerment. That doesn't feel good, nor does that feel like we're quote unquote in control. So we hurt people to be in control, and we continue to do that because it keeps us emotionally, relationally, and psychologically safe. We, and this may sound a little counterintuitive, we have to be in spaces as adults where we're deliberately and intentionally working on these wounds, right? There are many modalities that can serve us in that space, but we actually have to get into spaces that are so safe that we can actually unravel ourselves and be unsafe. It sounds like a paradox, but it's really that simple. Most intensity, most trauma, most wounds, psychological, relational, emotional, occur in a relational context. So they have to be healed in a relational context. You have to be witnessed in that. You have to be held in non-judgmental and compassionate and really empathic ways so that you can get a real life sense of, oh, I'm not broken. Oh, I actually do matter. Oh, I am worthy of love. I'm worthy of receiving. So many people they again go back to that self-referential piece that I spoke to earlier. So many people believe they don't deserve, they're not enough, they don't matter. And so they're hurting other people comes from that place as well.
And you brought something up that's really interesting about, being intentional with healing. And as I'm hearing you say that, I think one of the things that can be confusing at times for people is that, like, do they need to do this work like when they have like a good equilibrium? Meaning, like, a lot of times if people lose their job or they're, in a toxic relationship, like the relationship and not having money are the problems. It's not necessarily like working on stuff from the past. Do you think people need to get to a place of like where they have a good solid equilibrium so they can actually figure out, like, is what's bothering them their situation in the current moment versus something that may have happened to them in the past?
It's both, right? So maybe you're intuitively touching on something here. For us to move through our pain in an optimal way or really deal with deeper layers and levels of trauma or patterns that are really embedded in our physiology and psychology, we have to be able to learn to regulate our nervous system. So real meaningful change and transformation comes from a more regulated nervous system. So when we engage in somatic practices, that help our nervous system move into a parasympathetic response where we feel safer in our bodies. And an entry point to that could be a down regulating breath practice that is part of your regular daily routine, maybe even multiple times a day, like a box breath or a 5 and 5 breath as a simple entry point, where you're having a lived experience of, oh, this is what it feels like to not be restless, to not be wound up, to not be in a sympathetic response, to not be so angry, to not be hypervigilant. The more you can do that and learn to regulate your nervous system, the less reactivity occurs in your body and in your life. From that place, you can elicit more meaningful change because you actually are more resourced energetically, emotionally, physiologically. So we have to learn to regulate our nervous systems to be able to make choices that are more creative, that are more robust in thinking, that we can problem solve with greater efficacy. We can't really do that effectively when we're in a constant sympathetic arousal, or when our amygdala is just on fire because we're so scared that we don't know where the next dollar is going to come from. And that's a hard thing to ask someone though, right? Like, oh, just stop and don't look for money when you don't have any and just meditate. Not that I'm asking you to meditate, but it's far beyond that and different to that. But it's a hard thing to ask someone. So you've sort of got to do both. And it's which comes first, chicken or the egg. But if you can regulate your nervous system more and more, you're more optimized to actually make change and solve the issues in your life.
I'm so glad you brought this up because you see this a lot in the nutrition space too. People are like, all right, if you eat healthier, it's going to fix your, help fix your mental health. But, you can eat more protein and fiber all day long. It's not going to like fix some severe trauma you had when you were, when you were younger. That being said, if you eat healthier and you're active, the chances of you having better mental health are good, right? And so I think
Yes.
it's important to have these nuanced conversations about all of this. And that being said, I think you're right. I think that people who have been um, unaware for a while, or they've been stressed out for a period of time, they struggle with impulse control. They struggle with making, the right decision in the moment because they're so emotionally, dysregulated. What have you found in your years and years of doing all this to be like the most effective way for yourself to regulate in the moment so you can create separation and gain some awareness around what's actually going on?
Yeah, paradoxically, co regulation is one of the most powerful tools we have access to. And I'm a big believer of when I look at the evolution of humanity and I look at how we've come to where we are, right? The level of intelligence that we have, the way that we've created, the way that we've navigated this earth plane that for millions of years was quite foreign to us. Part of that is being socialized in very specific ways. And when we've become panicked or dysregulated or in fear or not knowing how to do and what to, how to behave, how to act and how to respond to an environment that was quite volatile, in connection, partly this is partly right, like in addition to the discovering fire and eating meat and psilocybin and all those things that have helped, the expansion of our prefrontal cortex, all those things, what has contributed to that is social harmony and the way we've supported each other in our nervous systems through the neuroception of our nervous systems interacting with each other and helping each other when we've felt disoriented. And so if my wife comes to me and she's really dysregulated or she's really upset, what would help her more is not me also being dysregulated and angry and upset, but rather being really grounded and calm and breathing slow and being the anchor point for her nervous system to latch onto and soften and down regulate. Right. And so when you say, like, when you ask that question, again, to create separation from the trauma, from the pain, from the problem, but to still remain individuated is healthy co-regulation. Because again, most wounds, most pain that we experience in our life is in a relational context. Therefore, it needs to be made whole in a relational context with other people that you trust, respect, revere, and that meet you, again, I'm going to repeat this because it's simple but very powerful and often hard to do, that meet you with non-judgment, compassion, and empathy.
I think it's tough. And this is just speaking from my experience. You look at people like in their 20s, and when I was younger, I was spending time with people that were also making really bad decisions. And so, A, I was used to it. B, I wasn't going to ask like one of my buddies to be like, "Hey, can you like hold my hand while I'm struggling with anxiety?" Right? And it just wouldn't have gone over well, just given like how they viewed what we were doing. Right? I say that, because I think that that's a common struggle, is that people are spending time with the wrong people and they don't have this sense of community that you're talking about. Talk about the role of that. Like, how can people who are in their 20s like navigate the self-help space and wanting to improve their nervous system, in a world where, you're still kind of hanging out with people that are making bad decisions?
Yeah, it can be really difficult to when the ship is a big ship is going in a particular way. It can be very difficult to steer it another way, right? It takes time, and it requires, and that's part of the my response to you is people have to be patient with themselves because we live in a world of instant gratification and we want change like that. Like have an idea of something, we think, oh, we want it. Like, oh, I want $1 million or I want $100 million, and we need it tomorrow. Life doesn't always work. Or sometimes it does. Sure. I mean, you go play lotto or something and you may win your $100 million and it happens within 24 hours. But life doesn't always work like that. And so if you have an idea of, oh, I want to be different. I want to maybe stop spending time with these kinds of people, or I want this kind of life, and how I'm living my life isn't conducive to that. Start small. Start with reading a book. Start with going on the internet and read an article on self-help or meditation or healthier lifestyle habits. Jump on an AI interface such as ChatGPT or Claude and say, what can I do to be healthier? What can I eat to be healthier? What can I do to calm my mind? Like, we have access to so much information, the time that we're living in. You have to start somewhere. Now, things that are going to move the needle in a more profound way is you facing the deeper parts of yourself that you've been running from for probably 10, 20, 30 years. Like, to actually face the pain that you experienced that was repressed and suppressed, but in a healthy way, in a relational context, being witnessed in a safe space, and actually working with that stuff, feeling what was unfelt, right? At the same time, choosing who you spend your time with. Like, it is very true that we are the sum of the 5 people we spend the most time with. There is a deep truth to that. And it's also difficult sometimes to let go of those people because they have been our anchors. They have got us away from the trauma that we've been running from, or the painful abuse that we don't want to look at because we don't want to relive. And this isn't about reliving your past. No, 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 no. That's not what we do. It's about, again, moving from a disempowered to empowered state. Because what often happens when we experience trauma, we shut down, right? And so in shutting down, we're not expressive. And in not being expressive, we feel disempowered. Our power is taken from us. We gave it away. We lost it. We can't get it back. So we have to be able to emote, and we have to be able to express in various ways to be able to regain our sense of consciousness, our sense of self-worth, and our sense of power.
When it comes to regaining consciousness, I think that it's pretty clear that in order to connect with others, you have to be able to connect with yourself. And there's a lot of people that are feeling numb right now, or they felt numb in the past, or they're going to feel numb 6 months from now, or whatever the case may be. And they have a hard time like tapping into themselves so they can stop feeling lost and begin to feel alive again. You mentioned co-regulation, which I agree is very important. Um, what can people do like on their own? Like, if they just have some time in the morning or in the evening or while they're at work, to work on connecting better to themselves?
Yeah. So often the most tangible thing that we have access to is the thing that initially moves the needle the most on transformation and change. And so that is our body. So most people are very disassociated and disconnected from their bodies. They're just on auto run. They don't really feel themselves. And the reason why they don't want to feel themselves is because underneath the layers of the body and the feeling is this deep pain that just sits there. And we don't want to touch that. So we avoid it as much as possible. But for someone that's interested in transforming their lives and you want to do something on your own with yourself, move your body, exercise, go to the gym, do yin yoga, go for a walk, get yourself a massage on a regular basis. Start doing sounding practices like vocal toning, breath work. Get in your body. The more you get in your body, the more contact you have with your body, the more empowered you become. The more you start to realize that your body actually isn't unsafe and that it's a powerful tool for deep transformation.
And so what has been the most effective thing for you personally? Like, I know you've talked about box breathing. I think that's been helpful for me. I know Huberman talks about the physiological sigh. Like, what are some of the what's been your favorite, like, mechanism to, like, immediately, like, gain control of your body?
Yeah, there's an element of a combination of breath, sound, and movement. I really like that pyramid and that triangle, right? Or that triad. And I'll give you an example of that. So, an expression or a form of holotropic breath, and you can, and a pretty safe example is you can inhale through your nose sharply and exhale through your mouth passively. So it would look like this. So, I'll very often, and part of my daily practice involves either one of these three or all three, generally all three. And so I'll have a breath practice in the morning. Again, the techniques vary for me just because I choose to expose myself to so many different techniques. But I'll give you a stack that I think is pretty cool. You sit down and you breathe like that, and it's a 5 to 10 minute practice, like literally a 5 to 10 minute practice, and you'll breathe like that for a few minutes. And while you're breathing like that in a seated position, you can be on a chair or you can be seated on the floor. You're also moving, right? Move forward and backwards, but you're moving as you're breathing and you're loosening up your joints. So it's good for you. You can move like this. You can see if you're watching this video now, you can roll your wrist, you can roll your shoulders as you're breathing forward. It doesn't matter how you move. This isn't a technique that is very specific with this. You're just moving intuitively, right? And then towards the end, when you're doing your breath, just the last maybe minute or two, you may do this. So you're vocal toning at the same time. And then once your practice is complete, you can put a timer on, you can just be intuitive with it, lay down for a moment and just feel and observe. This kind of connection to your body is very activating. So that's an up regulation. So great to do in the morning. Wouldn't necessarily do it at night. Wouldn't hurt, but I wouldn't necessarily do it at night. Do something a little different at night, a little more passive. But doing something like that in the morning is not only there's a stack of health benefits, right, that come with that, but it's also accessing deeper emotional parts of you, especially if you come in with an intention. And that intention could be one word. That intention could be an exploration that you have or a feeling that you want to experience. You seed it and you allow the breath to take it from there. And you unconsciously allow the breath to just go. That's a pretty powerful practice, actually. And then to answer your question in a deeper way, what's moved the needle for me, yes, it's actually breath, sound, and movement has moved the needle for me. And it's been very impactful. Plant medicine has been very impactful. Doing my inner work, working with other coaches and therapists and so forth has been very impactful, reading many books. But the thing that I can really, really lean into is a deep, deep practice of what would be known as holotropic breath work or biodynamic breath work.
So what's been the thing that you've had to work on the most, like, recently in your life?
Recently in my life, my child is nearly 4 years old. She's nearly 4 in March. Being a dad has been wildly beautiful and profoundly challenging at times. But the level of challenge that has come forward for me as a result of that, doubting my self-worth as a father and even as a husband as well, because having a child, for the most part, for most of us, no matter how aware and conscious and spiritual we are, it affects the relationship between partners. And so there's that as a result of that, it brings up stuff. And for me, it's been like my worthiness around, am I good enough to be a father? Because sometimes I'm reactive, sometimes I'm impatient, right? Like, to be really specific, patience has been very much tested for me the last few years, but particularly the last few months. So I'm really, really facing what is patience for me and where does the impatience come from and the reactivity and the volatility around that. And I understand the source of it, but it's actually working with it in real time and choosing to be different. So patience and self-worth around my fatherhood has been some things that I'm really actively working to, because they've come to the surface of my awareness. So I'm choosing to actually be with them as opposed to run from them.
Like, where do you think a lot of this impatience comes from?
I mean, it comes from what I witnessed, the modeling I experienced growing up in my father and my mother. I grew up in a very violent family, a very volatile family, and a family that was very reactive, both from my mother and my father in different ways and some very similar. Where it's being reactivated now is our children will I mean, people in life, relationships full stop are mirrors for us, right? Children are exceptional mirror balls in our lives, right? And often what happens is that the age of your child reflects back to you the age of your inner child, right? And the things that were happening during that time. And what it's bringing up for me is all the visions and all the times where my parents were very impatient with me. And again, because that was my modeling, my instinct is to model that back to my child. But my conscious mind says, no, that's not healthy and that's not what I want. My intellectual mind says that as well. The intelligence I have and the awareness I have, the education I have around parent child dynamics and how we relate intimately and so forth. But beyond that, I don't want to choose that from a pattern perspective. So it's pushing up on my edges, it's pushing up on my ego that wants to remain in what's familiar and wants to be in control, because being reactive and impatient is a way to be in control. And in those moments, I've got to realize and I've got to work with, hey, this is a 4-year-old child. Hey, I can show her love. Hey, I can co-regulate with her when she's dysregulated, right? I can be patient. I can practice that. It's an opportunity to actually totally flip the switch on this. And that's what I'm working on.
And then what part of this I wonder is like just you having compassion for yourself, because I look at it objectively. I've known you for a while. I know you've got a successful business. You've got, your partnership with your wife. You've got a baby now, a 4-year-old, I should say, almost. And then you're launching a book, which I, as someone who's working on a book now, I know how much energy and effort and time that takes. And so to me, it kind of seems like normal. Like I'd be shocked if you weren't experiencing some level of like dysregulation because of the stress that
Yeah.
all of that brings,
Yeah.
right? And I think that, I think at times with entrepreneurship, as we both are, like, that you can control certain things, and there's certain things about what you just described that you can't. Like you can't control like your child, so to speak,
Yeah.
right? You can
Yeah.
model, but you can't physically control them. The same with like launching a book. Like you can do all the right things, but sometimes like it just doesn't pan out, right? So I bring that up because I
Likewise.
think that I think acceptance is really important, because I think it helps let go of the shame around all of this. And so have you thought about that? That like, this is just like a normal part of what you're going through, in
Yeah.
adjacent to also looking at where, what's triggered this?
Yeah. All of the above, man. And it's very intuitive of you to say that, because what underpins the impatience and what underpins, some of the I guess some of the really the deeper stuff that I'm working on, which I touched on this. I touched on this self-worth, right? And the self-worth piece. And it's not that I don't care about myself or I don't love myself. It's that I can be really hard on myself and not move into acceptance. Right. Like I want things in a very particular, this is control. This is the tool of the ego. And we all control in different ways. And one of the challenges that I've had in my life is not being kind to myself and being more compassionate with myself. And as a result of not being compassionate with myself, I have shame spiral, as so many men do, over and over again. And what the shame spiral does is put me in more rigidity and more reactivity and more impatience. And so what I'm really working with, even at a deeper level, is this dance between not letting shame, like just, oh, I raised my voice at my daughter. I can do different next time. Not I raise my voice to my daughter. What's wrong with me? I'm a piece of shit. I can't believe that's the only, and like let that be a focal point, right? Or let that be a reason why I'm not good enough. Or, oh, I know so many things, but how can I raise my voice? I should be perfect, because of moving away from that. And being kind to myself has been something that's been very hard for me, because again, the modeling that I experience and the modeling that we all experience, we take on. Remember what I said at the beginning about being self-referential, right? And so I was never really modeled what kindness amongst people is like, nor to self. So it's a steep learning curve as an adult, and it's been a crux for me, man. It's been a pain point for a very, very long time. And the beauty of having a family in the way that I do, and allowing those relationships, because that's the key. You got to allow it to be a mirror for me. Is I am moving into way more compassion and way less shame than I ever have before. Like even the last few months alone, I working with my teacher, the shame that I feel is far less intense and far less frequent, which is a win. That's a win for me.
And it's tough too, I think, when it comes to the self-worth piece and comparison piece, because, in our industry, there's like a public scorecard at times, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where everyone's seeing how many views you get, everyone's seeing how many comments you get, everyone's seeing if your book like made some sort of list. And I think the important thing to remember is we both know people that are way more successful than us that don't have the personal pieces put together, right?
Very correct. Most people don't. Most people compensate, man. Like you can be 90 something percent sure the more successful someone is, the more they're hiding from themselves and from the world. They're compensating. And we all do it. I do it. You do it. We all do it.
Yeah, and you have to objectively, and I thought about this a lot recently, like objectively look at yourself and say, and it's tough, like when I get to the end, like what's really gonna matter? Like what's gonna matter? You know, and I think that's an important question for people to look at because, there's not a lot of people that when they get to the end, they're like, man, I wish I would have like worked more. I wish I would have done that podcast, or I wish I would have met that person. Most people are like, man, I wish I would have like taken more time to self-reflect. I wish I would have spent more time with my family. I wish I would have whatever.
Yeah. I wish I said sorry when I needed to.
Yeah, and it's also and it's also hard because we live in a world where your metric of success in the world is based on what you can see on the surface, right? And you only see the tip of the iceberg. And so it's just tough. It's this tough dance and battle that we all face. I guess my 2 cents is just echoing what you said. It's that, I know that when I didn't have a healthy, relationship and I was, single and still looking and all that stuff, I remember saying to myself, I wish that I could trade places with someone and just settle down, even though I was having all this success in my business. And, it's really interesting that now that I have that, I see why I wanted it so much. And so I have so much compassion for the people that haven't gotten to that place where they're like so successful in business and yet they just can't figure that other thing out. And that's just a message to people to say like success only gets you so far. And you're always going to still like yearn for that one thing. And that is relationships and connection. Because at the end of the day, like happiness is based on that. It's based on like how good are you and how happy are you in your romantic relationship? How many, solid friends do you have? I mean, yes, it's important to make money to survive, but at some point it becomes diminishing returns. You know what I mean? So that being said, I appreciate your vulnerability, and your honesty. Um, at what point, like, do you feel like you're making progress with that now, or do you feel like you're still in the storm of all that with the self worth stuff?
Both. Both. I do feel I'm in the storm of it, man. And I feel I've made massive progress when I look back even just to 3 months ago. And I don't I'm not I'm also really cognizant, man, to not focus too much on the progress, although that may sound like an oxymoron, but I want to focus less on the progress and the outcome and more on in the present moment, can I be centered? Can I be present? Can I come back to my body? Can I choose a little differently between, stimulus and response, that space? Can I linger in the space long and can I extend that space? That's my focus because for me, life used to be so fast. And I don't mean as an adult, I mean as a kid. Like everything was so scary and so big. And I carried that same level of restlessness and yearning to achieve and create in the world as an adult, right? And I really, really hung my laurels or placed my laurels on what good of an athlete can I be? How many tournaments, competitions can I win? How can I stand out? How can I create the most wealth? How can I have the biggest impact and the biggest voice? And all that stuff's not a bad thing. It's the come from that matters. My come from was compensatory. My come from was I'm not good enough. I want to run. I want to keep running for myself, and all I know is fast. So I'm just going to keep going fast. And so now it's less about the progress and more about each moment. Again, I'll give you an example. Like this morning, I could feel myself getting agitated when my wife's away at the moment for a few days, and I could feel, and I've got my baby girl, and I could feel myself getting agitated because she just wanted to play, and we had to get to school, right? And I paused and I thought, who gives a about school? Like it's a little it's great. It's a little Montessori thing. It's fantastic, but So what? Let her play. She's in her imagination right now. I don't need to pull her out of that. Because in that moment, I'm literally transporting, because we do this, man. We time travel in our nervous systems and in our minds. I'm literally being transported to all the times my mum and dad put pressure on me. All the times because I used to imagine a lot as a kid. It was in my imagination a lot, and I was pulled out of that imagination, right? And that the thing that I need to get her to is more important than her playing just there. But what it's really triggering, man, is me never having parents that were aware enough of that to let me play, to let me be. And it's activating that part of me. So it's got nothing to do with her. And so in that moment, I can choose to keep putting pressure on her and keep spiraling in shame and reactivity, or I can pause and slow down, communicate with her differently, but more importantly, communicate with myself differently. Right. And every time that happens, man, that's when, by default, progress occurs.
I want to touch on something you talked about before, where you were talking about like this pursuit of achievement and standing out, and it's like this trap. It's like, when I get this, I'll be happy. When I get there, I'll be happy. And I remember, um, I remember before I got my YouTube plaque, which I'm super grateful for. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get this. Like, this is all I want in my life. And then like the day before, I remember, man, like, is it gonna be like that good? You know, is it gonna wear off? I know it's gonna, knowing what I know about dopamine, it's gonna wear off quick. And I not like, I was obviously super happy and grateful, but the like the euphoric feeling wore off in a few days. After I made the post and said, look at me, I got my plaque, like it kind of all went away, right? And it's like, it's so true, and it's hard because we're chasing after things, and we all want to be liked. We all want to feel like we're mattering in the world. We also have to understand like our own relationship with dopamine. And an example that I saw recently, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if you grew up like playing video games, but I grew up playing like sports video games like Madden and hockey games and stuff like that. And my buddies and I, we would play. And then if you lost, you had to give up the controller and give it to someone else. There was like an ending there, right? Now these games are created for people to keep going. Like there's no end. And these kids are playing like virtually on a phone or on a screen where there's no competition, right? It's a scary place to kind of be in, because even like something like video games, which even back then people were like, video games will rot your brain. Now you can look at it as like, oh, that was actually kind of good because we had competition, we had community, you had people around. Um, so like how can people navigate like this dopamine world where there's this constant pursuit? You know, that's my roundabout way of my question of like, how do people navigate this?
Two things: slow down, literally move slower, spend more time in nature, create blank space in your day. And I know that could be difficult for someone that maybe has to work or thinks they have to work 12 hours a day to support their family, etc. But you'll find micro moments, even if it's just 3 minutes every few hours, to slow down. Because slowing down, what the change of pace does is it gets you out of the next thing, It gets you out of future orientation, and it brings you more into the present moment. And when we're in the present moment, life feels a lot slower. And as a result of that, we're pumping less dopamine because because dopamine's anticipatory. We're not so stuck in anticipation of the next thing and the next thing. And the second thing I would say is create a practice of gratitude every day. A gratitude practice could be every night you write 3 things that you were grateful for the day. But don't just write them down. Like really emotionally and somatically connect to them. Really be in those moments of gratitude. What gratitude does is it if done correctly, if you like, if it's an integrated practice of gratitude where you're integrating your body, your emotional being, your thought process, your presence, it produces more serotonin. And serotonin, I don't want to say counteracts dopamine, but it's a very grounding hormone. Like it keeps you in the present moment, and it helps again slow you down. So those two practices, you have a deliberate practice. Maybe it's like once a week you get out in nature and you just spend some time and sit in a forest for an hour, or at a park, just listen to the birds sing. Right. The more we slow down and the more we practice gratitude, the more we're less worried and we're less anxious and we're less future pacing. And that can be an extremely beneficial thing for not only us but our relationships and also our goals as well. We think clearer. We are more creative. We're more advantageous and effective problem solvers. When we're stuck in repeat and hustle, right, too much, we lose that ability.
So do you think the same methods are true for, like, if I were to ask the question, what can people do, like, on a regular basis to make sure they have a healthy nervous system? Is the same, would you recommend the same types of things, or would there be things you change?
I wouldn't change anything. I would just add some things to that. I mean, the more time we can spend in nature, the better, right? The more time we can spend with people that we trust, respect, and revere, the more our nervous systems are tuned to safety, right? The more we're in our bodies and the more we treat our bodies kindly with respect, the more our nervous system is regulated, right? The more we literally practice regulatory practices, the more our nervous system regulates. So I would just add to all of that. Like, what are you consuming? Because if you're consuming a lot of horror and violence, you're gonna probably, a lot of what's happening in the world, that well, there's lots of things happening in the world, right? There's almost infinite things happening in the world. But if you're focused on the war and the conflict and the deprivation and the poverty, like, you're gonna jack up your nervous system, right? So yang and yin, you're taking action, you're doing in the world, you're affecting change, you're achieving goals, you're working out hard. But what are you doing for the yin? Are you sleeping well? Right? Are you meditating a little bit? Are you slowing down and reading? You're spending some time in nature. You're going for a long, slow walk. You're doing some stretching. Like, it's not about balance. It's about harmonization and sustainable expression. Because if you're only doing one type of thing energetically, right, like it's hyper masculine or hyper yang, then you're losing in part of life because that's not all we are. That we're not whole in that way.
And when it comes to relationships, um, I think a lot of times people create chaos in their relationships by way of self-sabotage, by way of um, communication, how they handle conflict. I can go on and on with the stuff that causes problems. What are some of your top tips for creating a framework or creating a container for a healthy relationship?
Communication really matters and how we communicate. So frequency and volume of communication, I'm not talking about, and that also means don't over communicate. But are you connected to your partner in a relationship at a very fundamental level? Like, do you have opportunities and spaces within the relationship where you can share, where you can make requests, where you can share your needs, where you can share concerns, right? And you can create that for each other. You can once a month, you can have a communication date, or once a week, right? Where you just both get to share with each other what's up, what's alive, what are you thinking about, whether it's the relationship or something else. What's some of the tough things that you're going through right now? What is something that you'd like behaviorally your partner to change, but what are you taking ownership of, in relation to that? Because anything that's happening outside of us is really a reflection of what's happening inside of us at some level, right? So communication is really, really important. If I were to give two more things, I'll give three things, right? What space are you creating for intimacy? So again, healthy communication is intimacy, right? Intimacy isn't just sexual intimacy or sexual contact. It's more than just that. It's how you dream weave, how you share goals, how you move towards shared vision. The intimacy, you could be looking at a beautiful piece of art, then you're sharing intimacy in that moment, right? Traveling together, like sharing in your values. Like, if adventure and travel is something that you both love doing, like, how often are you doing that with each other? Right. So creating time to be with each other in the busyness of life really, really matters. And so that's that kind of intimacy, right? So you're really one, again, is it a date night? Sure, it could do that. But where you creating space to be with yourself, and the caveat to this, to be with your partner and be with each other. But the caveat to this is like, where are you spending time with yourself? Where are you actually having solitude, alone time, not isolation or loneliness, but time with you, just to be in your hobbies or to be in your practice or just to have some time to chill? Like, where are you being with yourself? That's that. And then the third part is really important in romantic partnership is sexual intimacy. Now, how that plays out is totally different for everyone. It doesn't have to be penetrative sex, right? It can be something else. It can be it can be foreplay, it can be touch, it can be massage, it can be the intention to move sexual energy with each other. It can be eye gazing, it can be a number of different things. But where are you sexually intimate with each other? And again, you don't have to schedule this, but you've got to allow this to actually happen in your relationship. Now, here's the thing. For some people that have been in a relationship for a long time, you often hear this, oh, the sex has dried up and the intimacy has dried up and we're more reactive with each other. You hear very few people say, oh, we're 20 years together and intimacy is awesome. You definitely hear that sometimes, but you won't hear it often. And so you have to have a practice of being connected to stay connected. Like the more connected you are, the easier it is to stay connected. The more you allow disconnection, excuses, and busyness of life, or even repressed trauma to come through and make convenient excuses to not be intimate, you're going to be challenged.
So you and your wife have been together for a while. What's been like a practice you've used to go from being like disconnected to connected, like you just described?
Man, all three that I just mentioned there. We make sure that having a kid and not having a lot of help with our kid, and being entrepreneurs as well, it makes it a little more challenging. So when she has a little school day, like we make sure like once a week we're connected. Whether we're going for a walk, we're training together, we're talking, we're sharing what's going on in our lives. Okay, yes, we live together and we've been together for 8 years. And when I say our lives, but like in our internal lives, whatever we want. So we really create and carve out the space for that. And same with sexual intimacy too, man. Like if we're not doing that, if we don't make time for each other, it doesn't fucking happen. The plaque that you got from YouTube didn't happen from you doing all. It happened from you exerting a lot of effort, intentional effort. Relationships are no different. Building business is no different. Building anything that's meaningful and worthy is no different. And look, sometimes, man, I tell you, we don't get it quote unquote right. We go, days and weeks, sometimes months without like being connected in the way that we know is really healthy for us. And sometimes, she's going through something like she may be having a series of migraines or some hormonal issues, or I'm really consumed and hyper focused, or with work, or I'm going through my own stuff and I don't choose to share that in those moments. And we've got to come back together. Like we don't have it perfect, man. We don't get it right. Yeah, we have a lot of tools. We quote unquote know a lot. I mean, the more you know, the less you know. But we're not ignorant to intimate relating, and sometimes we don't get it right. And coming back to each other is part of that growth journey, that growth process. But what we are committed to is coming back to each other, as uncomfortable as it can be sometimes, especially if we're upset at each other, right? Or we conveniently blaming the other person when it really has nothing to do with them and more to do with our internal state.
You talked about the more you know, the less you know. I think that was something I wanted to ask you about too. Do you think, you've almost kind of handicapped yourself a little bit with being in the space that you're in, and that there's like these metrics and like, and let's be real, the self-help space is notoriously known for convincing everyone they have a problem with something, right? They need to fix it. That's how we make money, right?
The beautiful thing is you're not broken. You got nothing to fix. That's the beautiful thing.
Well, that being said, like, do you think that because you're in the space that you're in and that she's in the space that she's in, you kind of have created like an unfair scorecard for your self-worth in relationships?
So the answer is yes. And the opportunity, though, is to move beyond the shame of quote unquote failing and move into I'm human, and move out of so much control and so much bitter disappointment because we haven't got it right into, oh, we're human. Oh, that doesn't excuse poor behavior, but it gives us an opportunity to reset, not live and carry out action through shame, and come back into closer intimacy. So ipso facto, it's all a path. Ignorance, knowledge, whatever you want to call it, all of it, or every part of the end of the spectrum, it's all an opportunity to come back to self in a more meaningful way.
My guy, thanks for coming back on the pod. This was an awesome convo. I love your wisdom, vulnerability, tactical tools. I know you got a new book out. Tell the audience where they can get it. It's like tuned in and turned out, right? Like
Tuned in and turned on. Yes, that's the title of the book. Christine, my wife, thought of that title. I quite like it. The publishers like it, and I get a lot of good positive feedback on it. So I always give her credit for that. She came up with it. So it just came to her, and I said, "Huh, that's not bad. It's pretty good." So you can get the book with a stack of bonuses right now. Tuned in and turned on book.com. And yeah, I'm excited for the launch, man. My focus is, can I get this book? Can I support in getting this book to in the hands of in the hands and hearts of as many people that need to read it and that are meant to read it, and be as non-attached to that as possible, and give the rest to God, but do my best and put effort in. Just like I mean, this isn't really effort talking with you. I enjoy that, but it is, like it's focus, right? It's diligent discipline, and yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come on your show and share with your audience again, man.
You got it, man. What's the one biggest takeaway you want people to get from the book?
I'm going to try and distill it into one because there's three essentially, but I can do that. One, the book takes a pretty sharp turn towards the end, right? And what I want people to know is really possible is that when you get yourself right, when you get yourself healthier, you move into healthier relationship. And it's healthy relationship that actually brings you closer to God, that brings you closer to potential, to possibility, that has you stop living in fear so much and more in possibility, less in probability, more in possibility, less in contraction, more in expansion. And it's the foundation of healthy relationship that is a tremendous fast-tracked vehicle for that. But what gives credence to that is the inner wholeness work that we get to do as individuals.
Steph, thanks again for coming on the show. I encourage people to get the book. Steph definitely knows what he's talking about. It's great stuff. And once again, thank you again for coming back on the show.
Bless you, brother. Thank you.